record? Fantastic. So whoever wants to go first.
And if you don't mind, I'm going to take my mask off, but I will keep 6 feet away from all of you. And if I sneeze, I will turn around and do it. So as is the tradition on our court, the senior justice gets to tell the junior justice what to do. And by the way, if you want to feel young, then when you get to be in your 50s, get on a court like the Supreme Court and they'll refer to you as junior. You've got a long way to go. Let me do this real quick is I'll give you a brief thumbnail sketch of how I wound up on the Arizona Supreme Court. And then I want to make sure that there's time for Justice Lopez to do likewise. And then we look forward to your questions. And we don't know what's in your heads, so that's probably the best opportunity to leave time for questions for you to find out from us what you're particularly interested in. Real quick then about how I got to the Arizona Supreme Court. I started off my legal career, so to speak, as an undergrad as well. I received my undergraduate degree from West Point. So when I graduated, my next 5 years guaranteed were going to be in the Army. So I didn't start off as an undergrad thinking I would go to law school. I thought I was going to have a career in the military. I wound up serving 6.5 years on active duty, and then I went to work in Silicon Valley for a couple of years. This was a point in time when the semiconductor industry was very cyclical, very up and down. And I realized that I was going to have to earn an advanced degree in order to be able to make sure I could get a secured position within the high-tech industry to be able to ride out all those downs and be there for the ups. My wife at the time was taking an MBA, and I saw what she was doing, and I didn't want anything to do with that. And then I had, as part of my undergrad career, taken about half of my courses in math, science, and engineering. I'd had enough of that. But what was still probably at the forefront of my mind was the desire to continue to serve, something that obviously had been very present for 10.5 years during my time in uniform. And I looked at the field of the law as an opportunity to be involved in a way day to day to better the lives of fellow citizens and contribute to the community. And one of the best ways I thought to do that initially was to work as a prosecutor. Well, the only way you can do that is to go to law school. So I talked to my wife about that. Now, when my wife and I first met, she was an HR manager at a law firm. So when I told her I wanted to go to law school, the first thing she said was if she had wanted to marry a lawyer, she could have done that. The way I like to tell the story is that I told her I wanted to be a prosecutor, and that was different than being a lawyer, and she believed me enough to encourage me to do that. We looked all around the country at law schools, and we wanted to find one where it was in an area that we could put down roots, raise a family, be able to afford a home, and I could take part in programs that work with prosecutors' offices to make sure that that's what I was interested in doing. If you think about it, I was on my third career and I was just about 30 years old. So I had to get my act together. Ultimately, we settled on Arizona State University's College of Law. Then it was here in Tempe instead of downtown. So I didn't have to fight all of that traffic. And the law school has still to this day a fellowship called the Truman R. Young Fellowship that allows a third-year student to basically work as a prosecutor during their last year of law school. So we should look into it. And so I competed for it, I won it, and I got to work as a prosecutor my last year. At that point in time, the big plan in my head was to work as a prosecutor and ultimately be a homicide prosecutor. That's what I wanted to do. So I went to work at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office. I did that for about 4 years. Then my wife was expecting our second child, and public prosecution doesn't pay a whole lot. And so I had to help support my family, and I went into private practice. Enjoyed it very much, but life has a way of presenting a different plan than the one you had. And I ended up running for Attorney General of Arizona in 2006. I was the Republican nominee. And fortunately, I did not win because that allowed me to then return to the county attorney's office and go to work as a line prosecutor again. Again, my 5-year plan at that point in time, this is mid-2008, was to be a homicide prosecutor. So I failed twice to be what I wanted to be. Fortunately, I failed up. And then I wound up being elected the Maricopa County Attorney in 2010. And I served in that spot for 9 years. It was coming to the end of that term when I realized that I wanted to find a different avenue for service. I had all this experience in administration and working with people and helping to improve various aspects of our justice system, criminal, juvenile, and civil. And I had friends who also encouraged me to look at serving on the bench and to take my legal career up to that point and put it to service to the people of Arizona. And so consequently, I submitted an application, went through the process, got to do it twice. So I had twice as much fun as most people do when they go through the process. And I was appointed to the court in September of 2019. And it has been what I expected and then some. When you have the opportunity to work with really smart people who are dedicated to serving the public, as I've been fortunate enough to experience, each day going to work is actually fun. If you enjoy logic puzzles, if you enjoy figuring out what words really mean when they're put together in a sentence and in a paragraph and in a statute, and you enjoy talking, debating, arguing with a small a, having civil differences of opinion and trying to figure out what's the answer to really tough questions. Working in the legal field in the first place is a place to do that, but getting to work as a justice on an appellate court even more so. So that's sort of how I got to where I'm at today. And then, explicitly where I get today, I took the 17 down to where it meets up with the 60. But that's my story. I'm sticking to it. I'll turn the floor over to Justice Lopez.
I will follow. Remove my mask while I'm speaking. Well, good evening, and it's great to see all of you here. And I'll follow suit. I'll start guess where I was born and raised and work my way through my experience, my circuitous route through various schools and how I ended up where I'm at today. I was born and raised in Texas, and I went to the University of Texas at Austin for my undergraduate degree. And I had a notion beginning in high school that I wanted to perhaps serve in foreign service, but I was interested in public service, like Justice Montgomery, but just in a different way. I was always intrigued with Middle Eastern politics in particular. So I had a concentration in that area as an undergraduate. And my plan was to go to graduate school, get a PhD, and then go into government service. And so got the undergraduate degree, started a PhD program at the University of Chicago. And I hadn't really given a whole lot of thought if that's really what I wanted to do. I just had this thought and didn't really revisit the decision, mull it over. And so essentially in the program at Chicago, you had to take 3 years of coursework, almost redoing your undergraduate degree before you began working on your dissertation. And I pretty much early on decided that it wasn't the best fit, that essentially being in academia was really not what I wanted to do. And so I figured that out the first year. It took me a whole second year before I got the nerve to change course, because I'd never finished something that I started. And so after the second year, I decided that I probably should have done, and it didn't do for the very reason that I should have done it, was that ever since I was in grade school, I had teachers telling me, you are going to be a lawyer, you should be a lawyer, and all the way through high school. And probably because people were pushing me in that direction, and I'm a bit of a contrarian, I said, no, I'm not doing that, I'm going to grad school. Well, joke's on me. I left grad school after 2 years and beat a retreat to Arizona from Chicago. And my connection to Arizona was that I had a family member living here, and I would come here for every vacation, fleeing Chicago, and fell in love with Arizona, the desert, everything about the state, just absolutely loved it. And so when I left graduate school, I fled with a plan that I was going to get to Arizona, and I was going to take the LSAT, which I did immediately, and I was going to apply to ASU, and hopefully I'd get in to school here and not have to go somewhere else where I didn't want to live. I decided I wanted to go to school in the place that I wanted to live, the place I'd come to love. Fortunately for me, it worked out. So I enrolled in law school shortly after I had come to Arizona. went to ASU, like Justice Montgomery Law School here in Tempe. So I completed my degree before the law school moved downtown. It was a wonderful experience. My first job out of law school was to serve as a law clerk for the late Chief Justice Jones. And so my first job out of law school was to work as a law clerk on the court that I was ultimately appointed to. And so that was kind of a poignant moment returning to the place where my career had started almost 19 years later. So I served as a clerkship for a year. Then I went into big law, worked at a big law firm for 3 years, and things couldn't have been going better. But always in the back of my mind, it was bothering me that I had never gone into public service. And I knew that I was going to make a change at some point, but just hadn't really worked out how I was going to do it. And again, I liked the people I was working with at the law firm. Things couldn't have been going better. And then 9/11 happened. And for me, instantaneously, I knew that I was going to find a way to work in public service because I kept thinking about, well, if I had stayed in Chicago, I would have had my PhD. I would be a specialist in Middle Eastern affairs, and I'd be involved. I'd be able to help in some way. It was the most helpless feeling I had ever experienced in my life at that point, to be sitting in a meeting at the law firm while all of this was unfolding. And so literally within a month of that, I began applying to work in different federal agencies. And about 9 months later, I began my career with the Department of Justice at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Phoenix as a federal prosecutor. And I worked there for nearly 13 years. And one of the most interesting and sort of to close the loop on the issue of all of that time I had spent sort of taking a deep dive into Middle Eastern politics, I had the opportunity as an AUSA, as a federal prosecutor, to serve on a task force in Iraq, assisting the Iraqi government with the prosecution of Saddam Hussein and his top regime officials. And so I spent 6 months in Iraq at the end of 2004, beginning of 2005, and then returned to my service at the U.S. Attorney's Office here. So wonderful career. Like Justice Montgomery, I was drawn to be a prosecutor, to serve in that way. And it was a wonderful experience. And so those of you who are thinking, maybe you want to be a prosecutor, maybe you want to be a defense attorney, I'll give you a little insight about what it means to be a prosecutor. It's not just about putting people in jail. I mean, that's an important part of protecting the community, but there's a part of being a prosecutor that few people ever understand, is that you are making the decision about whether to charge citizens in the first place. And some of the best decisions I ever made was saying, no, I'm not going to charge this citizen, sometimes even when I could prove a violation of the law, because justice didn't require it in those circumstances. And so it was a very satisfying career to be able to affect people's lives, to protect the community, but also make the difficult decisions, sometimes telling the federal agency or the police, we're not going to bring charges because it doesn't serve the interests of justice. And so for those of you who might think that you're leaning to, if once you go to law school and you're out and you're thinking, I want to be a defense attorney or prosecutor, keep that in mind. There's a lot more to both of those jobs than meets the eye. It's not really black and white about, you either put people in jail or you try to keep people out of jail. There's a lot of nuance about the way the system works, and you can affect change and have a lot of influence in ways that you wouldn't think of it at first blush, but you'll get there and consider those things. So at the end of 2014, Attorney General Brnovich was elected Attorney General. I had known him when we worked together at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and he approached me and asked me if I would accept the position as Solicitor General of Arizona, which is part of the Attorney General's office. I agreed to take that position, and so I left my 13 years of service at the Department of Justice, and I served as Solicitor General for 2 years at the Attorney General's office, and it was from that position that I was appointed to the court. I was appointed in January of 2017. So it's amazing. I mean, 2015. So it's been almost 5 years, and it seems like, I don't know if the time has flown for you. It seems like I just arrived yesterday, but it's almost 5 years that I've been on the court. And like Justice Montgomery said, it's been a wonderful opportunity. One of the questions the most common questions I get from people about what it's like to be a judge, it's how does it feel? How is it different to be sitting on the bench making decisions about cases when you spent most of your legal career as an advocate, for one side and arguing cases? And I say this only slightly in jest, is that every case I ever had as an advocate, I was utterly convinced that I was correct. And I thought only a foolish judge wouldn't understand that my argument's the winning one. And as soon as you put on the robe and sit in the position where you have to make the decision, just like that, magically, every case became much more difficult. And so that was the big difference. Making that decision is a heck of a lot more difficult than it is advocating for one side. They have unique challenges, but it's been wonderful, and it's all we have to do is do the right thing, follow the law, apply the laws to the facts. You don't think about the outcome, which side's going to win, how's it going to be received, are people going to be mad at me, are people going to like me? It's not about that. The oath just requires that you impartially, in an intellectually honest way, look at the law and ask what does the law require here. And it's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed serving in the role as a judge.
All right. I'm absolutely bursting with questions, but I'm going to open up to all of you first. So, you can make it, Amanda.
Thank you guys so much.
Do you want to ask a question on your way out?
Sure. I guess since you guys are judges, how do you prevent political bias from interfering with your verdicts?
I think the last point that Justice Lopez made is that when you sit down to look at a case, the first thing you don't do is pull out some political party's platform to figure out, well, what does this say about it? If you start with the law and you follow what is written and what's required, you're going to get to an outcome that is based on a democratic process that involves the participation of citizens and legislators and parties and everything else. Overlaying that then with particular political bias just screws it all up. So it's our role, and it's one that I'll speak for both of us, we take very seriously. That oath of office means we're not supposed to decide a case as a Republican or as a Democrat or a Libertarian, or as a man or as a woman. We're supposed to decide the case based on the law that's been presented to us and the facts and apply it.
Thank you.
Sure. I have a couple of points on that question.
See you next week.
The late Justice Scalia has a quote that really goes to this point, and I have it on a framed poster and engraved somewhere else in my office. And he said that a good and faithful judge, if you're a good and faithful judge, you probably won't always like the conclusions that you reach. If you like them all the time, you're probably doing something wrong. And that's absolutely true. And so I would have the same questions for judges before I became a judge. I would ask the same thing, and I would probably listen to their answers with skepticism. But when you become a judge, if you take your constitutional oath honestly and with full fidelity, and you deeply respect and understand how important the separation of powers is, and understand that every time a judge places his or her policy predilections above the law, then you are in effect serving as a tyrant. You are assuming powers that by the constitutional order are assigned to the legislature, which represents the people. That's where you get to make policy. And so we all, whether you're a conservative judge or a liberal judge, meaning your party affiliation, not the way that you do your job, because hopefully we're all being faithful to our oath, but we're all going to make decisions and reach conclusions on the law that yields results that we perhaps voted against on a ballot as a citizen. And that's fine. I mean, in my view, the worst mistake we can make is to violate our oath and put our preferences above our duty to fairly and impartially interpret and apply the law. Because I have absolutely no right, because I'm in for a temporary period of time, nor does any judge have a right to put their views above the collective wisdom or lack of wisdom that the people have expressed through their laws. And so, I mean, we all feel passionately, and frankly, I'll have to concede. I told you we don't pay attention to what kind of reception we get on cases, but it's impossible to escape all of it, because even if you don't look for stories on it, people will come up and ask you or say, did you hear what somebody said, or this or that? I have to tell you, some of the cases I enjoy the most is when I know that even people who are cynical about judges and think that judges are always cheating for their party side or for their ideological side, the cases where they have to look at it and say, wow, that's not the outcome I would have expected they would have voted for. Maybe they are doing something other than just putting their thumb on the scale. And I enjoy those cases the most, where an honest person will follow the law, and that's always what you look like. How strong is the analysis? Is the analysis and conclusion the best under the law, the right result? And that's all I care about, is that an honest reader will read it and understand that we're following the law. And over time, that an honest person will look and say, well, if they really were cheating, they wouldn't have ruled in 25 cases the way they did that year. And so we want the people to have faith in our institutions, and a big part of that is playing it straight as a judge.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else? Next question. Okay, come on, I know you guys have some.
Well, we were kind of talking about today, like actually in my law class, about like how a big part of being a judge is making sure that you're not legislating from the bench. And then we also talked about how when that happens, how a lot of those cases end up getting appealed because the ruling doesn't have a lot of like legal evidence or legal background to back that up. And so how do you guys think it's like able to overturn those when you guys get them? Or like, what have been some of those cases that you've gotten? Like, do you have any specific examples of those that you've seen? Because I think those are really interesting.
Well, if you look back over the last 2 years since I've been on the court, I know there have been 3, maybe 5 instances where we've taken up cases because we've had to clarify what the law is. Appellate courts and trial courts have been all over the map on interpreting statutes. In fact, I think the first majority opinion I got to author and work on involved an interpretation of a citizen's initiative involving drug treatment, and whether or not a particular criminal offense should count as a strike against the defendant that would make them ineligible for rehabilitative treatment and would require them to go to prison. And some courts had said, yes, others had said no. And when I sat down to write it, one of the things I had to do was look at the legal reasoning the courts had used to come up with the different interpretations. And to your point, what's the easiest way to appeal a bad decision? Look at the legal reasoning. If it's not there, or if cases have been misapplied to support a particular point that a judge is trying to make, well, you appeal on the law. I mean, one of the easiest bases to get us to take a case is to highlight where courts have been interpreting the law wrong. And then it's our job to say, no, this is what the law is in Arizona. And in the case that I was referencing, I had to sit down and say, okay, here, we've had 2 different lines of cases arguing that this is how the law applies. They're both wrong. We start from the premise that this is what the citizens passed, and this is what they said they wanted to have happen. And so this is how we need to apply a lot of these facts. And so courts from here on out, this is what you need to do. So That answer your question?
Yeah, we also kind of going off that, we talked about like how different facts can really change the outcome of a case, like whether someone had intent, whether someone has a sort of background, so that makes a lot of sense.
All right, you wanna add to that, Joe? I get emotional talking about it.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Losing my voice here.
I think that's right. I think, first of all, I think almost all judges do their best to not put their personal views above the law. But there's lots of opportunity for people just to disagree or make mistakes when they're interpreting, complex legal statute, laws that are clearly written. And so, but your point about, appealing cases to the next court, if the judge gets it wrong or puts their personal views in, that's one of the reasons why it's so important for us not to do that. Because as what's called a court of last resort, at least on state law issues and state constitutional issues, there is no appeal beyond our court. And the only cases that can be appealed from our decisions are cases that involve our interpretation of federal law or federal constitutional provisions, and they could be appealed to the US Supreme Court. And so that's why it's so critically important, because if we get it wrong, or we're not doing our jobs correctly or following our oath, then people who bring cases to us rarely are going to have an opportunity to appeal to another court.
I just want to say, if either of you need to take a break and grab a drink of water at any time, go ahead. All right.
Yeah,
The good thing about
fine
having
now.
two is that we're not, sitting here without anyone. But okay, I have a question from Zoom, and then I'll go, you had one, right, Jonathan? And then DJ, and then you in the back. What's your name?
Shanice.
Nice to meet you. I'm Sebastian. All right, so the question we have from Zoom says, it's from Astika. Astika, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, but thank you for your time and sharing your story with us. You both had a lot of interaction with the judicial system in many different capacities. So can you both tell me what the biggest problem you think, what you are seeing with the judicial system as it currently is constituted is? Do you feel like you have the ability to change this issue in the positions you currently hold?
I'd say one of the challenges we have in the judicial system is judges keeping in mind that it is not our role to fix every social issue that comes up. I would say that certainly in my lifetime, courts have been used far too often to resolve political disputes that are supposed to be debated among citizens and then taken up by legislatures and then addressed by governors. Democracy is messy, it's hard work, and it requires people to be informed and involved. And also, like I alluded to earlier when I was talking about my time on a court, you have to be able to have civil disagreements. And far too often, in my mind and in my opinion, courts have been a surrogate for that long, messy route of trying to develop a coherent opinion, a majority opinion among the population. And some of those decisions, those opinions, those conversations, if you take the time to have them, they don't always cleanly break down right, left, Republican, Democrat. They don't, and they didn't. And we've been trending in that direction. So one of the things that I tried to do, and that I have done in some of my opinions, is to make it really clear when issues come before us and we apply the law as it's written, that we may not like the policy outcome. Justice Lopez mentioned, if you're doing your job as a judge, there's sometimes where you don't like the result, but that's where you go. So one of the things that I think is important for us to do, and that I will endeavor to continue to do while I'm on the court, is to apply the law as it's written so that fellow citizens can understand. If this is not the outcome you wanted, then go to the legislature, which is the policy-making branch of government, and go talk to your representatives and make them do their job, in as much as you're doing your job, to get them to pass laws that match your expectations for what our society should be and do. And then you can count on me and my colleagues to then apply that law the way that you wrote it.
I agree with what Justice Montgomery said. In addition, this is more of sort of a practical issue with the courts that our court has been dealing with for a long time, and I know other courts have too, is what we sort of call access to justice. And so most criminal defendants all criminal defendants who can't afford counsel charged with felonies receive court-appointed attorneys. But living in a society that's highly regulated, highly dependent on legal rulings, and in the non-criminal sector, anywhere from landlord-tenant issues to divorce, family law issues, to contract disputes, the system is very inaccessible to the average person. It's very difficult to afford counsel, if you had an eviction issue, or if you had a minor contract dispute, if you're getting divorced. Too few of our citizens can afford lawyers to handle those matters when they do have to go to court. Now, I would encourage everyone here to always avoid hiring lawyers and try to resolve your issues outside of court. That's usually my first answer when a friend or family member calls me and tells me about their problem and says, what do I need to do? So first of all, just approach the person who you're having this dispute with in a civil way and sit down and try to reach a resolution. Because if you send it to court, then the only people who are certainly going to win are going to be the lawyers. And so try to resolve the issue without taking it into court. But nevertheless, people do encounter issues in their lives where they have to go to court. And so our court for many years now, and we've had some recent innovations, is that we're trying to improve citizens' access to counsel, to help them understand court proceedings. So that ranges from having pre-made forms that apply to all kinds of hearings, where there might be somebody hired by the court or volunteering for the court who can help them fill out forms, to challenge an eviction or to prepare divorce pleadings, someone with some modicum of legal training to help them navigate the court system. And we've also very recently created a new class of legal practitioners. It's like somewhere between a paralegal and a lawyer, and they'll be licensed and they'll be able to represent people in a number of matters like these, like family court matters, where maybe they don't need a lawyer. Maybe they don't have to pay a lawyer $400 an hour to help them with a divorce, but they could use somebody with some expertise to make it easier to help them find solutions, and then file pleadings in the court. And so access to justice is an issue that is chronic, and we're trying to address that. We've been pretty innovative and pretty aggressive, and I think we're making some progress, because for a nation of laws, and we resolve a lot of our disputes in court, and that's the way it's going to be, then the average citizen should have an ability to go in with some measure of confidence and resolve their matters in our court system.
Now, those other jobs that are like non-lawyer jobs, don't worry about it. If you want to be a lawyer, there'll be plenty of work.
Yes.
Plenty of work.
Awesome. All right, Jonathan, you were next.
I was just kind of curious about, because I'm sure trying to be a justice is very competitive. What exactly are the requirements, or what exactly is desired?
Well, first off, we have a somewhat unique process in Arizona where we have a merit system for nominating judges and justices. All appellate court judges and justices go through this process, and I think 4 or 5 counties use it right now. A committee will meet, or a commission will meet and review applications, and from that group, they'll select individuals that they want to interview. And from those that they interview, they'll create a list that does have a political calculus to it. You can only have so many from one political party, and you have to have others. And then it gets submitted to the governor, and the governor gets to make the appointment. So ultimately, beyond meeting basic professional qualifications, If you submit an application to be nominated to be a judge or a justice, with 1 year of legal experience, you're not going to get picked to be interviewed. You can certainly turn in the application. Ultimately, it is the chief executive officer for the state who gets to determine what they want to see in the judges and justices that they appoint. For Governor Ducey, what he's made clear from day one when he was first elected governor, his view was that he wanted to appoint judges and justices who should be no surprise given how we've been speaking this evening, who understood the role of the judicial branch in our 3-branch system of government and would be disciplined in saying what the law is and not make decisions based on personal preference. So that's sort of the philosophy that's been used. But I think to address your question more directly, I would say you need to have a significant number of years' experience practicing law. I think if you want to be a trial judge, I would say at least 10. If you want to be an appellate judge or justice, more than that, in various fields and demonstrate your ability to understand complex problems that we deal with within government and within society and within business, that you are a hard worker. There's 7 of us, and each one of us has to carry our load in order for the court to do its job. So also someone who can collaborate with others, and that you have an intellectual curiosity. Our Chief Justice Brutinel likes to say that we're all generalists. I've never practiced family law, but when we get a family law case, I've got to dig into it. So being intellectually curious and wanting to learn and work hard to do it are some of the characteristics as well.
That's a great question, and I'll add a little bit to it. First, with a point about the process, as Justice Montgomery said, when there's a vacancy, there's a notice that's filed, and those who are interested file an application. The application's probably 50 pages or so, and they ask everything you've ever done in your legal career. Now, if you've been practicing for a couple of years, probably not that difficult, but they literally want you to list every case you've ever been involved in. How many times have you been in court? How many trials? How many appeals have you written? All of these things, all of this data, and it's actually quite an arduous process to go back and try to compile it. And they literally want the name of every person you ever worked with and any legal job. And to Justice Montgomery's point, they want to know that you have the capability as a lawyer, the demonstrated competence to do the job, the experience. But another aspect of this, and this is important in any aspect of life, and it's particularly important in the law, is civility. If you're going to be a judge, then they want to appoint people that every member of the bar, whatever side of a case they're on, will view you as someone who's capable, not just that you have the temperament to be a judge, but that you have a demonstrated history of being fair, of being honest, of being civil. And so they ask for a list of attorneys who have been every attorney who's ever been on the other side of a case against you. And they call these people and they talk to them. And so it's critically important that the person who may have been your biggest adversary in a case, that you could have had just a brutal but fair fight as advocates, that those people, all of those people are willing to say, yes, Bill Montgomery, did he fight hard, but he always fought fair, and I could take him at his word. And I knew he was always reasonable, and he represented the state well, even though I disagreed with the charges. And so they want to know everything about you. And it only takes one credible person who's respected in the community that tells them, oh, you know what, in a case, he didn't give me the disclosure. He cheated, basically. And that's all it takes. And that can derail your aspiration to ever be a judge. So whenever you're practicing, when you go to law school and you finish and you start practicing, just always remember to treat other people with respect, and always act with integrity. Because basically it is difficult to earn a reputation where people trust you, even people who are on the other side of your cases, your adversaries trust you. And it only takes one situation where you betray your own values and lose your integrity to tarnish your reputation, and could have lasting effect and could keep you from, for example, being a judge if you ever aspired to do that. And so as complex as the law is, as easy as it can be, you always know what the right thing is. Just always be honest.
All right, so you and then you in the back.
Yeah, this one's for Justice Montgomery. So when you said that you failed at becoming a homicidal prosecution twice,
Not
like,
homicidal. I didn't aspire to commit murder. Thanks for letting me clarify that.
thank you. What did you say, like, you learned from those experiences of failure, you know, to keep going or like change direction, or what did you gain from those failures?
Well, both of those times is because I wanted to make a decision that took me off of that path. The first time, what it taught me was that I really had a passion for public service and for wanting to serve as a prosecutor. And the second time around, when I made the decision to leave the county attorney's office in order to run for county attorney, it really required a lot of reflection, a lot of prayer, conversations with my wife and friends, that if I was going to step off of that career path again, where I thought I wanted to go, that this was going to be the best decision for my family, that I had a skill set I could offer and that I could make a difference in the job. And so that's what I took from that experience.
On that topic, and that's a great question. And I know we're here to offer legal advice, but here's a piece of general life advice precisely on that point. Failure, in my experience, I have learned more from my failures than I ever did from my successes. It's easy when things are going well for you. But it's when you fail that you're tested. Learn how you made the mistake, why, how can you avoid it, but you also learn something about about your own ability to persevere. And so don't ever be despondent in a way that goes beyond your initial disappointment and frustration. Learn from your failure. Winston Churchill had a number of great quotes about failure, and he basically said that more or less that success is comprised of moving from one failure to the next without loss of enthusiasm. And so the point is, as long as you're in the game, you're not a failure. And through what seems like failure, and maybe your failure to achieve a certain objective, is ultimately the best opportunity for you to learn something about yourself and learn about what you're doing and learn, how to adjust course.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, we had a question in the back, and then we have one more from Zoom, and then let's wrap up with a couple of quick ones before we all got to get out of here. Don't want to take too much of the justice's time. So what was yours?
Yes, thank you so much, Judge Lopez and Judge Montgomery, for taking my question tonight. So Judge Lopez, you mentioned that when you were an attorney, that you were thinking, how could any judge judge against my thought process? And so as you two are judges now, I'm just curious of what is the thought process of a judge? Different from obviously that of an attorney, that informs you of how to judge on different cases. And also a little bit, just a follow-up on another thing we had discussed, as far as what you were also discussing, Judge Lopez, as far as people not being able to afford lawyers and attorneys. How do you see that being in Arizona? Is there anything that we're doing in this state to help those people?
Sure. I'll take the first question, the thought process as a judge. And so what I was alluding to as an advocate, I mean, at the core of it is always, as a trained lawyer, to make the best argument, to apply the law to the facts. And as an advocate, you have to kind of shape the law and shape the facts to lead the court to the point where they can rule in your favor. And so a lot of that is just simply kind of psyching yourself up. I mean, we have ethical obligations of lawyers. We can't lie about the facts. We can't misrepresent the law. We're not required to do that. So you always have to operate within the boundaries as an advocate. I think being a prosecutor, it's easier to transition from being a prosecutor to being a judge than it is necessarily from being a defense attorney or a civil practitioner to being a judge. I don't think it's impossible at all, but it's easier as a prosecutor because you're wielding the authority of the state and you have an ethical standard. You're held to, although not technically, you're almost held to a different standard. You're not worried about winning, you're worried about doing justice. And so it's kind of the same thing. So transitioning from a prosecutor to a judge, I just always wanted to be on the right side. I never wanted to stretch the law or, stretch the facts to try to get the right outcome, because as a prosecutor, that wasn't my job. It was to fairly present the law, fairly present the facts, and then let the judge or the jury decide. My job was just to coherently, competently present the information. And I never would have brought the case unless I ethically thought I could do those things. Being a judge, it's kind of the same way. I never have to worry about, as a judge, about winning or losing a case. That's a big difference. I don't have a client, whose interest they're paying me to help them prevail or to take them through a legal case. As a judge, the thought process is, I just want to get this right. I want to listen to everybody. I want to listen to both sides. I want to do extra research and listen to my law clerks. And so that's the only thought process for me. And I'm sure it's the same for Justice Montgomery. And I think any judge would essentially say the same thing, although they may say it differently, because you just want to get it right. And I don't care, not in a callous way, which way it comes out. I just want to make sure that when I make a decision, that a fair and honest reader who reads it understands, oh, I see why they ruled in favor of A or ruled in favor of B. That seems right. That seems like the best application of the law and the fairest representation of the facts. So that's my thought process as a judge. If there's anything that keeps you up at night, it's not, boy, I don't like the outcome. Did I get it right? Did I take everyone's input? Did I follow the law in the most intellectually defensible and honest way and correct way as I can? And so that's kind of the thought process. And when you're an advocate, it's a little different because you want to prevail for your client. And so you stretch the law and stretch the facts within ethical bounds. That's your job. And so as a judge, that both sides are doing that, and you have to find the truth. You have to find the best interpretation of the law, the most honest, accurate interpretation of the facts, and you put them together and hopefully get it right.
The only thing I'll add to that too is that when you're an advocate, you're arguing a particular outcome given the facts in your case, and you're trying to get the judge to agree with you that this is the answer that the court should come to. But when you're a judge, you're looking at it and you're thinking, okay, I see what you're arguing here, but what does the law really stand for beyond just the facts of this case? If I say the law means you win here, does that mean that the law should say everybody else who has a similar circumstance should always win then for every similar case in the future? And so what I find myself doing is that instead of arguing a particular point of view when I was a prosecutor, I'm looking at it from a different perspective as a judge to say, okay, I see what you're arguing in this case and how you think the law should apply. But it's my job as a judge now to look at it and see, well, is that all the law that applies? Are those the facts that are always going to determine this kind of an outcome? And what kind of guidance do I need to give to other lawyers and other judges in other similar cases? And how do I explain this in a way so that the people we serve understand that this is what the law is and this is how it's going to work? So if you want to change it, you need to go change it to come up with a different answer. That's how I put you to.
And your second question about the access to justice issue and what are we doing in Arizona? I briefly alluded to it a few minutes ago, but the former Chief Justice Bales, who retired a few years ago, and then Chief Justice Brutinel assumed that position. Each Chief Justice serves for 5 years, and they exercise the prerogative of essentially coming up with an agenda or a platform, things they want to accomplish in their 5 years. And so Chief Justice Bales had access to justice was his primary focus, and Chief Justice Brutinel has expanded that a bit. But some of the things, the more practical things that we tried to do to help access to justice, and it didn't necessarily involve having a lawyer or a legal practitioner with you, but there are a lot of types of cases where if a citizen who's involved, like a landlord-tenant issue, if they just had some guidance, like how do I fill out this form? What is this information they're looking for? And so the court system, through our court system, the administrative wing of our court, through the guidance of the Chief Justice, we created a litany of forms that are user-friendly, and in conjunction with that, had either volunteers or employees who would serve at centers like at the county courthouse. And so there would be people there to assist citizens who are coming in, and let's say they have a divorce, or like with not a complicated divorce or a landlord-tenant issue or some issue like that. There were forms that were created, and they had forms in Spanish too for people who didn't speak English. And then they had people who assisted them in filling those forms out correctly, because those forms would then be filed with the court. And by the time these people got to the court, the judge would have a better understanding of what was at issue, which would help the judge understand and help the citizen who's now a party in this action to better explain their position, to better elicit facts that are important for the judge to know. And a lot of times you just had people walking in cold. They wouldn't fill anything out. They didn't know what the rules were. And so even that little bit of assistance can make a huge difference for a citizen in terms of their experience to have their rights vindicated in court. And so as we moved along, just in the last year, we created a new class of legal practitioner, licensed legal practitioners.
Yeah, what do we call it? Limited licensed practitioner.
Yeah.
Limited legal practitioner.
Yeah, and so these people, again, they fall kind of somewhere between a licensed attorney and a paralegal, in that these people will be tested, and there's a couple of various family law and some limited criminal representation. And so these people will actually be able to fill out forms, like write the papers for a client. They'll represent them as a client, and in some limited capacity speak for them in court, or assist them as they speak with the judge in a hearing. And so these people will generally charge a fraction of what a lawyer does. And a lot of times I think some of the law firms will probably hire people to take clients on, and they'll represent them, for a lot of the matters instead of the attorney, which means that their overall legal cost is going to be greatly reduced, which means people who could not afford to hire a lawyer can probably afford to hire a legal limited practitioner. And so they'll actually have somebody there assisting them. And so those are some of the things, some of the practical approaches that we've taken in the courts to try to make the justice system, including the civil system, more user-friendly. So, so citizens can go in and have their rights vindicated, and they're just not overlooked or overwhelmed, because a lot of times that's what the judges strive, to get the facts and make the right decisions. But sometimes someone is just so overwhelmed, they don't even know where to start, and they have a hard time helping themselves to help the judge to get a right decision.
All right, well, we're almost out of time, and there were a lot more stuff I wanted to ask, a lot more things I wanted to ask about, from prosecuting Saddam Hussein to what you guys look for in like legal clerks. But I did say we'd get to this last question on Zoom, which was, I think it's a pretty good way to end. It says, is there a case in your careers you considered like the most impactful to your life or to your career, and what made it so? And then I'll add to that, if either of you guys have a favorite Supreme Court justice throughout history, excluding Scalia, I can tell you both are big Scalia fans, so let's exclude him because that's obvious. So if there's another one, just end with that maybe.
Let's see, the case that impacted me the most. The case involving a 10-year-old girl named Amy Deal. Amy Deal was murdered by an aunt and an uncle, ultimately killed her by locking her in a plastic storage box after torturing her for maybe 10 to 12 hours. I resolved that Amy's death was not going to be in vain. And her death, I think it was the 8th or 9th death in the first 8 months I served as Maricopa County attorney. And I finally had enough, as much as one person can, but I had a position that I could advocate from. And as a consequence of that, CPS was removed as an agency from the Department of Economic Security. The Office of Child Welfare Investigations was created, and then the Department of Child Safety was created from that. Since that time, the number of children in foster care in Arizona has been cut by in half. The number of cases that are properly investigated by child welfare investigators and law enforcement is over 90%, where before it might have been only 30 or 40. And to this day, I credit Amy for how and why Arizona's child welfare system went from 49th or 48th in the nation to #1, where other states now come to us to figure out what good looks like. And obviously, I still remember her name to this day. And I would have to say, since you won't let me use Justice Scalia, and I get to speak before Justice Lopez, I'll claim Justice Thomas.
All right. We've both handled big cases that have had a lot of publicity. But one of the cases that I still think about that was personally most impactful, it was a rather run-of-the-mill case and went to trial charging a human smuggler from Mexico. And so we all know about the phenomenon of immigrants entering the United States across the border illegally without authorization. And these people who are trying to come here are often exploited by human trafficking organizations that now are essentially embedded with the drug cartels. And this case was no different. It was a number of years ago. But we had a group of about 30 people who entered the United States illegally down near Yuma in the summer. And we all know how hot it is in Arizona, and it's particularly hot down there. And this person had held himself out as an expert guide. And so he told them that he knew how to get from there up to a point where they'd be picked up in vehicles. And then he knew where water was, and he had provisions for them. He had no such expertise. He was basically had misled them, had taken their money. He got lost in the middle of the desert, and people began getting sick. There were 2 young girls, about 10 years old, in this group, and they became desperately ill. And as soon as that happened, this guy, the guide, claimed that he was going to leave them to go get help. In reality, he abandoned them. When he didn't come back after a day and the girls were becoming increasingly ill, 2 other males from the group who were part of the immigrant group, they fled to actually find help. They made it up to a heavily trafficked road, and they saw a Border Patrol vehicle coming, and they understood that they were going to be detained and returned to Mexico. Nevertheless, these 2 gentlemen, they desperately waved down the Border Patrol vehicle, explained what had happened, described where they had come from. The Border Patrol sent a helicopter, found the group of immigrants who had been stranded. They sent a helicopter out there, and one of the girls flatlined on the helicopter. The Border Patrol revived her, and they got them both to a hospital in Yuma and saved their lives. The gentleman, I use that term loosely, the guide, he had done what ultimately we had to prove, which is he didn't go to get help. He abandoned the group and went to save himself by distancing himself from the group because he realized he had almost certainly resigned some of these people to death, if not all of them. And they caught him later in the day, and the members of the group identified him, and we prosecuted him, and he went to prison for a lengthy time. But just the story, the insight, I mean, you know, we can debate about policies and national sovereignty and immigration policy and the rule of law and all of that, but there are personal stories here, and being able to help vindicate, you know, the rights and the dignity of those people who he left to die just for their money was particularly satisfying. And it also illustrated the fact that, you know, the Border Patrol are there to police our borders, but these people are risking their lives and saving lives every day. And that was a perfect example where, you know, but for the fact that these two other gentlemen who basically ended their aspiration to be in the United States, at least that time, waved down a Border Patrol vehicle, and those Border Patrol agents saved those girls' lives. And so that was a very poignant case that left a lasting impression on me.
Favorite justice throughout history?
You know what, he claimed he knew I was probably going to say Justice Thomas as well, but yes, Justice Thomas is also one of my favorite. He has, for those of you who don't know much about him, he has an incredibly inspiring life story, and I would encourage you all to read about it.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. So we should probably wrap up. It's like, what, 7:05? Yeah, we end at 7. So thank you so much for coming. It was an honor to have you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Good luck to all of you.
Thank you guys for your.
So are most of you at the point that you're going to be taking the LSAT soon?
Yeah, I'm a sophomore, so very soon.
I'm a freshman, so I got.
If you got back to your location, it's nice. Good. But the other 7 are.
Good for you. So no matter what happens, you're in good shape.
Have a good day. I have a day.
Good luck to you.
How are you doing? Me too.
We're really fantastic. Wait, I go every Wednesday.
Me too.
What the heck? How have we not walked in together?
That's so